Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Cross and Pen. If you like these videos, please hit subscribe. I have a link to my blog post in the description down below, so please check it out. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about something that, believe it or not, is probably more debated in the church than it is outside of the church, and that is the rapture. We're going to talk about what the rapture is, what it means, and we're going to talk about why it kind of makes sense that it will happen. Now, as I said before, this channel isn't for people who are looking for deep theological support and substantiation for biblical issues. There are plenty of channels out there that do a great job of that. Watchmen on the Wall, Jimmy Evans, Greg Lauer are just a few of those. Go ahead, check them out. They really get into the scriptural references and interpret them in terms of current events and what's happening in the world. That's not what my goal is. My goal is to explain what the rapture means to people who really don't know a lot about the Bible, and specifically for those people who don't really have any belief or any faith. So what is the rapture? The rapture is the complete removal of the church from the earth in literally the twinkling of an eye. Faster than you can blink your eyes, millions of people around the world will disappear from this planet, and they'll do it simultaneously. And it's really the first truly global event, if you think about it. Now, globalization has been happening since the days of Columbus, when people started to explore and the world started to become smaller. That's really what we mean by globalization and this sort of interconnectivity. Now, certainly in the past several decades in my lifetime, technology has connected the world like never before. And the term globalization really became a big buzzword, especially in business circles, in the 80s, right around the 80 time frame. And then you look from the 80s even to today, 20, 30 years, how technology has just increased exponentially. So much so that we are connected to people around the world in real time. You can pick up the phone and call somebody on the other side of the planet and have a conversation. You can text somebody, message somebody. This very video itself can be viewed by somebody on the other side of the world minutes after posting. That's globalization. But as impressive as that may be, that's not really the same globalization that I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that's going to happen at the same time in every country, every nation, every city, every village. People are going to disappear. Now, there are some biblical references for this. I'm not going to delve too far into them, but I'm going to tell you why it makes sense based on those biblical references. So, going back to the disappearance, a couple of events that happened recently, one very recently and one maybe 20 years ago recently, is we look at COVID, we look at this pandemic, and we see how it spread around the world seemingly overnight. In a very short time span, it went from one nation to many nations and was declared a pandemic. And some may say, well, that was a global event. And in many ways it is, and it was. Going back to the year 1999, when the millennium was due to be ushered in, it was a big event, globally. Nations began celebrating. Every hour on the hour, another nation was celebrating the millennium. They were reigning in the new year. This was considered a global event. The rapture is going to make both of those pale by comparison, because the rapture is going to happen instantly and simultaneously. So you're not talking about people in one nation disappearing and it's on the news, and then we flash to another country half an hour later and someone said, yes, and people here just disappeared and we're getting reports from here and all over. We're talking about chaos, pandemonium on a level never experienced and almost impossible to imagine. That's the rapture. That's the removal of the church. And the church is the believers, the body of Christ. So why does this make sense? Well, right after the rapture occurs, a terrible time is going to begin in human history. It's known as the tribulation. It's a 7-year period, the last 7 years of this planet's existence. And it's going to be the most terrible time in human history. In fact, the Bible says, if those times were not cut short, no one would survive. That's how awful it's going to be. So when you look at the headlines today and you see one news story after another and you think, wow, the world's just getting worse every single day. Look at this story, look at that story, look at this state, that state, all these different things that are happening. There's famines, there's droughts, there's shootings. The list goes on. And you think, wow, the world's getting really bad. That's nothing compared to what the tribulation will be once the church is removed. So why does it make sense that there's going to be a rapture? Well, a couple of reasons. One, early on in the Bible, in the book of Genesis and in the book of Kings, two people in the history of the world were removed from this planet alive. They didn't die, they were taken into heaven. One was Enoch, one was Elijah. Elijah is probably the most famous because he was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire. It's recorded in the book of 2 Kings. Why did these two events happen? And they happened early on in the Bible, in biblical history. Two people taken up into heaven. Why? Well, we can get into a study of the ancient text, what a particular verb meant, how it was translated, and all those things. And certainly that would be valuable. But I think if we just step back for a minute and we look at this from a common sense perspective, I think God was showing people early on, hey, this can happen. I can take you into heaven. I don't need you to die. That's not part of the rules. I mean, it's part of the way things are set up and the way things normally happen. But I'm God. I can do whatever I want. I can take you right into heaven. And he did. He took two people into heaven. Now, fast forward, let's go to two books in the New Testament, Thessalonians, Corinthians, in which the rapture is alluded to. Now, I say it's alluded to because many people debate whether or not the rapture is real. And this happens inside the church because people outside the church, they don't care. They don't believe any of that stuff anyway. And if you're one of those people that doesn't believe, hey, that's okay. Because we get people in the church who have a hard time really believing if it's going to happen. And then there's people that argue over, well, it's going to happen here, or it's going to happen there, or it's not going to happen until the very end. I'm not going to get into any of that because I think it makes sense for it to happen prior to the tribulation. A cataclysmic event, I believe, is going to be what plunges the world into what everyone calls the New World Order, the one world government, the one world economy, the one world religion. All of this is on the cusp of happening now. Things have been put into place over the past several decades, legally, with leaders meeting at the different summits. You know, we read about these summits and say, oh, well, this summit's this summit's that. Yeah, there's some political things going on, but the outcome is setting the stage for life after the rapture. So why does it make sense? It makes sense because what else could plunge the world into such chaos? And when I say the world, I mean the entire planet at once. At once, every nation experiencing the same cataclysmic event and at the same time. Never in human history has that happened. There have been events, like I said, like COVID, years, decades ago, the different flus, different outbreaks, different continents, maybe they spread a little bit. Nothing like the rapture has ever occurred in human history or will. Now, why is the church being removed? Because the church is all that is keeping the world from going crazy as it is right now. The church represents the good. It is God's presence on earth. When God's presence is removed, when his people are no longer here, his wrath will be unleashed. And it will be unleashed in a time known as the tribulation. Now, some people say there's the tribulation, which is the whole 7 years. Then there's people that say, well, there's the great tribulation, which is the last 3.5 years. And that could be true. I'm not going to get into that. I think there's arguments on both sides of that. Suffice it to say, the tribulation is going to be a really bad time. That's all you really need to know. And if you're watching this and you don't believe and you say, nah, this guy's crazy, hey, that's okay. But if you wake up one day and you see on the news planes have dropped out of the sky, cars have crashed, patients have disappeared from hospital beds, police officers are gone, firefighters are gone, military personnel And not just this country, but every country. Family, friends, neighbors, gone. It's the rapture. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Now, we can delve into the text. And like I said, there are people who have done that. Definitely look into that. Where does that word come from? How are we interpreting that? Why is it such a hot topic today? It's a hot topic today because biblical prophecy is being fulfilled. Every single day, there is something happening in the world that's taking us one step closer to the fulfillment of prophecy. And the stage has been set for the tribulation, for the arrival of a leader who will come to save the world, known as the Antichrist. The stage is being set right now. It makes sense if you take a few steps back, you put everything into perspective, you see the big picture for what it is. And that big picture is God using his power as he has demonstrated in the past, in the Old Testament, to remove people from this planet without ever facing death. And it's going to happen. Now, in next week's episode, what we're going to talk about is we're going to tie together last week's episode when we talked about lies and deception, and we're going to tie in this week's episode, the rapture, because the two go together. They go together. And there is a lot more going on than most people realize. And this started several decades ago. So if you like this channel, hit the subscribe button, like this video, share it, and tell your friends, because every day we get another day closer to the rapture. Until next time, I'm Bill, and I bid you peace.